You are listening to 600 Second Saga. Today's feature is Relics, a Land Destroyed, beta version 8.14 by Mariah Avix. I surveyed the scene. I knew every rock to avoid and every soldier who had turned to fire at me. I picked my way to the temple for the 7th time today. I stared at the temple entrance. It loomed over the battlefield behind me. The columns had intricate stone carvings. The sun was warm on my arms, and I felt the sand biting into my skin when the wind gusted. I lifted my arm and rested it on an invisible perch. I inhaled deeply, smelling the world. Blood, sand, decay. I sneezed and heard a vague sound to my right. I waved to acknowledge my coworker. I reached out with my left hand and touched the column in front of me. My fingers sunk into it. I started scribbling notes with the invisible pen in my right hand. It felt like a wet but not slippery clay. I recorded the location of the pillar, the height of my hand, and the heavy, sludgy feeling. I pulled my hand out and wiped it against my pant leg. The weird feeling disappeared and my hand was perfectly dry. I stepped forward and pressed my foot against the stone floor. My foot was sucked down and I struggled to pull it free.
Did they even try to fix this? It's the exact same issue. I can't even get inside the temple.
I pulled my foot out and shook it off, even though nothing clung to it.
I just got a message that they finished recompiling it. Reboot and try again.
My coworker's voice came from the empty space to my right. I slid the invisible notepad toward her. I heard the sheet tear off and felt the sensation of paper under my hand again. I reached up and tapped my forehead right in the center. The world went black. I curled my toes. It felt like the world disappeared around me. I listened carefully for the sound of typing and conversations that reminded me I was still safe. I was still inside my cube at the office, not in the great empty blackness where the world ceased to exist. I sighed as the world returned. I stood a mile from the temple. The great battle surrounded me. I had stopped and talked to soldiers who would tell me of their families, their lives, their daily troubles. I had picked up a gun and taken part in the firefight. I had gone into the command post and flipped through the documents. I had read the books in the commander's bag. There was just one hurdle left to go. One piece still unfinished. The temple. I picked my way back to the temple and reached out for the pillar, expecting my fingers to sink in. They connected. Hard. I hadn't realized I was jabbing my fingers like that. I shook my hand and pulled it back before trying again. It felt like stone. I grinned and scribbled success on the pad. I tentatively pressed my foot against the floor. It held. I added more notes, feeling the smooth stone under my toes. I was getting excited. I knew I shouldn't. There were still lots of steps that could fail before we were done. Everything beyond the temple entrance was new to me, untested. Each stair and column was checked as I moved past it, and I added notes. I could smell the faint, wafting, musky incense coming from inside the temple. Avoiding the entrance, I walked along the wall, trailing my fingers over it. The blocks of stone fit perfectly together. I wiped at a patch of stone and made a face. I grumbled under my breath. A complete sensory immersive experience. Somewhere, some kid, or more likely some adult, was going to lick the walls to see how they tasted. I told myself it was just a series of created senses, an illusion in my brain. I licked the wall. It was dirty, rough, and salty. I spit and wiped my tongue. There was nothing on it, of course, but it felt like it was covered in sandy grime. I heard my coworkers laughing. It tastes like a rock, a dirty, salty, sandy rock. I grumbled and they laughed harder. I rolled my eyes and made some notes. I watched the wall. It looked damp for a moment, and then moisture dried in the hot, dry air. I scribbled some notes and turned to go inside the temple. Pausing at the entrance, a woman brushed past me. I felt the gauzy fabric from her scarf against my cheek. She smelled like sweat and roses. As I stepped forward, I saw a trail of blood drying into the floor. It was cooler inside the temple. A group of women gathered near a pillar in the back, whispering. A stack of scrolls were heaped in a corner. Long pews had only sparse groups of people pressed together, whispering. An occasional sob rang through the temple. I made my way toward the front. More people started to pour in and the noise from the outside increased. I slid onto the bench, and people sat on either side of me. I could feel their thighs pressed against mine. As we moved closer to fit more people inside our row, the temple was filled with people. The fear in the room was nearly tangible. The man next to me had blood smeared down his front and across his face. I couldn't tell if it was his. On my other side was a woman carrying a baby in a sling. The baby babbled until the mother hushed it. A tall man walked slowly toward the front of the temple. He turned to face us. His body sagged against the podium. I realized I was holding my breath and gasped in a deep gulp of air. The woman next to me squeezed my hand comfortingly. In the front of the temple, the man started speaking. At first just a whisper, then growing in force. People around me cheered. The noise outside increased. I knew what was coming next. I knew it wasn't real. I was trembling. I squeezed the woman's hand. I turned around to watch the entrance, tears already streaming down my face. Soldiers poured in through the entrance and began firing. People screamed, blood spattered. I heard the crack. I saw the flash. The feed cut, and I reached up to push the helmet off. It works. I brushed tears away. This was Relics, A Land Destroyed, beta version 8.14 by Mariah Avix. 600-Second Saga is currently open for submissions. Please visit our website to learn how to submit your flash fiction. Music is provided by Mads. Learn more about 600-Second Saga, our authors, how to submit your flash fiction, and how to support the podcast in the show notes. This has been Mariah Avix and 600-Second Saga.